Hello, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Michelle Marks, Chancellor of the University of Colorado, Denver, and I am so honored to welcome you to the third installment of our Chats with the Chancellor video series. There are so many incredible things happening in Colorado and our nation and the world. And at CU Denver, we're always asking the big questions and we are seeking big, bold solutions. But it does take strong connections with people and organizations all across our state to make a real impact. And I am so honored to sit down today with economist Elizabeth Garner. Elizabeth is the Colorado State Demographer, and she was also born in Colorado, which is something that only 43% of the state's current population can claim. Elizabeth, we are so delighted to have you with us today, and I can't wait for our conversation.
Thanks for having me.
So what exactly is a demographer?
So demography is the study of population change. So really it is technically only looking at births, deaths, and net migration, but all of the characteristics that go around with that. And basically it's an entity to create population estimates and forecasts to be used by state agencies primarily for program planning.
So Elizabeth, you have literally analyzed mountains of data from all over Colorado. What do these data tell us about who's living in Colorado?
I think one of the most important variables that we look at within that mountain of data really is age, because you behave differently as a 20-year-old, 40-year-old, 60-year-old, 80-year-old. You have different birth and death rates. You have different migration patterns. You have different likelihood of working or not working, likelihood of spending money differently, likelihood of going to school or not being in school. And so we've taken that information to really look at where does Colorado fit into the big picture.
Well, tell us a little bit about, who we are today, but where are we headed in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years? What do the trends look like?
So some of the biggest things, and you guys have been watching it as well, is this pretty significant slowdown in births. Started back in 2007. A lot of it had to do with the Great Recession, but also just actual universal access to more contraceptives. Created this downward pressure in births. And because of that, now the U.S. is about 625,000 fewer births per year than we had in 2007. So pretty significant slowdown. Colorado, we're at about 8,000 fewer births per year since 2007. So we can watch this coming through time, so we can see this downward pressure. On the older end, we see our fastest growth is actually no longer the 65 to 74, but now the 75 to 84-year-olds. Well, that means a lot, because 65 to 74, you're still pretty young. A lot of people are still in the labor force, pretty healthy. But 75 to 84, you get a lot more incidence of disease. So different entities are looking at that impact. Just even on local governments planning for emergency services like ambulance services.
Yeah. At CU Denver, we talk a lot about being a university for life. In other words, being a learner throughout your life and potentially throughout careers that twist and turn and last longer than they might otherwise. How do you think about the aging of Colorado, not only with retirees, but potentially the need to keep older Americans in the workforce?
Right.
And how to, we see a role for ourselves as preparers of talent at all ages and stages.
Yeah. Certainly education is a huge opportunity in terms of thinking about what do people want to do as they age. If it's going on to an encore career, how do they want to retool? So thinking, and how do they want to retool? Are they going to want to retool online? Are they going to want to retool in person? So it's really thinking about that market all of the time.
You also mentioned that your research and data is on net migration patterns.
Right.
And I'm interested in, are people staying in Colorado longer? Are younger people leaving? You mentioned fewer births, but why is it that we're seeing the aging of Colorado?
We started really migrating people to the state back in the 60s and the 70s. Before that, we weren't really a known entity in terms of quantity. At the same time, in the 60s and the 70s, the baby boom generation, which is still our largest birth cohort ever, was moving into that movable age group, into that an age group that would migrate.
So there were a lot of people moving in.
So a lot of people
more net in migration
definitely
than out migration at that time.
Absolutely. And before that, we didn't. So we had a very small cohort of people older than the boomers. And then you've got the boomers, a much larger age group. The boomers had a huge impact because like before the boomers, there weren't a ton of people in high school. So if you look at high schools that were being built, a ton when boomers were going into high school. Same with college. You had a lot more colleges starting programs and expanding as the boomers were aging into it. So as the boomers age through the 65 plus and then 75 plus, we get this fast growth. But after that, this is going to be regular growth.
So let's talk a little bit about the implications for higher education. I know that all over the country, with the coming demographic, some people call it a demographic cliff, others call it more of a demographic decline. How do you think about higher ed and demography, and what advice would you have to presidents and chancellors of universities?
It's to always know your market, right? We definitely see the cliff, or whatever you want to call it, the slowdown, coming, and there's really no way out, right? I mean, there is an absolute decline in kiddos. And it's really thinking about either how do you broaden the breadth, who is your market, or do you try and get a larger share of your market? So like if your typical market is the 18 to 25 year old, and I know CU Denver's different in terms of kind of its traditional base, maybe a little bit older. So it's like, how does CU Denver grab a bigger share of that group? Or do you say, no, we're going to go 18 to 70 on that breadth of who your market is?
That's exactly what we're doing here at CU Denver. We're thinking about learners. We like to say learners from 17 to 117. So CU Denver's goal, one of our key goals, obviously, is to think about preparing the workforce of the future, the talent pipeline. What do you think that these demographic trends, the implications they have for what universities should do differently?
I think it's important for universities to always be thinking about what is the next, what is that next big thing, being able to be nimble in transitions of whatever that next skill set might be, or tweak to skill set, I think is going to be important. But I think really engaging with firms, with industry, is going to be critical, and helping them help themselves. I'm a true believer in just actually preparing whoever it is, the base of how to be a good communicator and writer and learner. And if you can you might not know all the technologies that are going to be needed 10 years from now, but what you want to be able to do is prepare kids, or people, they don't have to be kids, how to be a good learner, how to be a good researcher, how to be a good writer.
Yeah.
And those fundamentals, I don't know if they ever really change drastically.
They are durable skills that
Durable
help
skills.
you navigate across jobs and careers, for sure.
And how to be a critical thinker.
We haven't yet talked about demographic diversity and what's happening. What is happening here in Colorado? I mean, I certainly have a perspective around college-going students. CU Denver happens to be the most diverse public university in the state. We're very proud of that. We are seeing faster growth in our Latino student population, for example. Tell us what's happening in the state. Where are we today? Where are we headed over the next 10 years?
So Colorado's really interesting in terms of that demographic diversity. Our youngest ages are much more diverse than our older ages. Really, almost 45% of our population under the age of 24 are people of color. Relative then to our population aging out of maybe the labor force, which is closer to about 16%. So we should be seeing across the board, those that are going into higher ed should be much more diverse now.
Well, I get to speak to a lot of employers who hire our students, and I'm always asking them, who are you looking for? And they are looking for a workforce that resembles their customers. They're looking for a workforce that resembles the population. So it's kind of an exciting moment. Let's go forward 27 years and hit 2050. Paint the picture of what 2050 in Colorado looks like based on the trend lines.
So by 2050, we're thinking that Colorado is going to be about 7.6 million people.
7.6 million.
So that's an increase. We're at about 5.8.
Okay.
Almost 5.8 and a half.
So growing, significantly growing.
But at a much slower rate. So like if you go the last 30 years, we are not even going to come close to that same amount of growth.
Growth, but a slower level of growth than we've seen.
Yep. We will be much older. Our average age will be much older.
Do you think that there are some people who are watching this conversation right now who are thinking, I'd like Colorado better if it had
fewer
people? What would you say to that?
Absolutely. I understand when we look at natural resource use, especially when we look at congestion, when we look at traffic. But I then want to ask them the question,
yes,
what are you willing to give up? Because the growth that we're seeing is due to job growth, filling a demand created by our wishes. So I wish to go out and have a cup of coffee. I expect somebody to give me that coffee. Am I willing to give that up?
I have one more question for you. And that question is this. What is it's a two-part question. What is the hardest thing about your job, being a demographer, being Colorado's demographer, and what is the best thing about your job?
I think the hardest part right now is that there are so many changes. Right? You've got this COVID thing. We're still trying to figure out how that's going to ultimately change work, life, living balance, and where people will live and work. So that makes that part really hard. Modeling births and deaths, we're pretty good at. Modeling that migration piece with now this wrench thrown in there, that's hard.
It is hard. It is
very hard.
Although I would encourage people who are listening to this conversation and are interested to look at your data and your charts.
Best part about my job?
Yeah, best part.
I get to interact with people like you and around the state.
I have found that too after 3 years now in Colorado. That is the best thing about Colorado, about Denver, about our communities, is everybody wants to work together to make this an incredible place to live.
Yes, absolutely.
It is absolutely. Well, thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us here at CU Denver.
Well, great. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of your program.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
So.